Jung's most perilous insight was not related to mental illness, but to individuals who perceive what others overlook and how this capacity can ultimately harm them. In his clinical work, Jung described patients possessing what he termed differentiated perception. Such individuals could read microexpressions, detect concealed emotions, and discern psychological patterns unnoticed by others. They could see beyond social facades, identify lies instantly, and sense the unconscious tension within any environment. Jung considered this discovery dangerous because these people repeatedly ended up isolated, fatigued, and unable to sustain ordinary relationships, not due to instability, but because their heightened awareness carried an unrecognized psychological toll. Have you ever felt like you see too much reading between the lines, catching the subtle emotional shifts and noticing what no one else seems to register? Comment 1. If you've ever felt this gift isolating you from others even when you wish it didn't. Comment 2. If you've experienced it as a quiet strength that helps you navigate the world more wisely. Today, I will present Jung's most dangerous discovery concerning individuals who perceive everything and why he believed this rare gift either destroys a person or transforms them into something exceptional. The case that brought this insight to light involved a patient described in Jung's private records a deeply introverted, intuitive individual who sought him out in 1913 during the period of his own psychological turmoil after parting ways with Freud. This patient, whom Jung would later classify as belonging to the rarest personality type, exhibited what he referred to as undifferentiated intuitive perception. Upon entering any room, she could instantly perceive the underlying psychological atmosphere, who was lying, who was suffering emotionally, and who carried hidden resentments. Jung wrote, "The patient displays an extraordinary capacity for perceiving unconscious contents in others, but this faculty appears to cause her considerable distress rather than advantage. She was unable to participate in casual conversation because she saw through every social mask. Friendships were difficult to sustain as others felt exposed and uneasy in her presence. She could not keep a job because her mere presence disturbed the unspoken collective unconscious agreements that allow groups to operate smoothly. Jung recognized that he was not dealing with a mental disorder, but rather witnessing what occurs when the unconscious becomes excessively conscious, when perception becomes too sharply attuned to permit social survival. He recorded her uncanny ability to describe people with precision, speaking of them as though privy to their innermost thoughts and hidden motives. Upon careful verification of her claims, Jung found them to be strikingly accurate. This was not psychosis or delusion, but a level of consciousness so elevated it had become socially hazardous. Yet Jung uncovered something even more troubling. This patient's exceptional perceptive capacity defied easy explanation. This led him to investigate what he would later label participation mystique, a psychological phenomenon in which individuals with highly differentiated intuition become inundated by the unconscious material of others. In his Red Book era notes, Jung wrote, "There are those among us whose psychic apparatus is so finely tuned that they absorb not merely conscious communications, but the entire unconscious atmosphere of their environment." Contemporary studies by Dr. Elaine Aron on highly sensitive individuals corroborate Jung's early insights. Aron's findings indicate that approximately 20% of people possess elevated sensory and emotional sensitivity. However, Jung pinpointed a narrower category within his psychological typology, the introverted intuitive type, roughly 1% of the population, who not only experience profound emotional depth, but also discern unconscious patterns with exceptional clarity. Jung noted that such individuals possess what he termed a differentiated intuitive function. Their cognitive processing extends beyond surface-level social signals to include unconscious emotional states, repressed material, and psychological patterns imperceptible to others. They recognize the depression, masked by forced smiles, detect the desperation beneath seemingly confident behavior, and sense the collective shadow that groups tacitly agree to disregard. Jung stated, "The danger lies not in the perception itself, but in the psychic isolation it creates. When one sees clearly what others cannot or will not see, one becomes a mirror that society cannot bear to look into." Do you think seeing the truth about people is a blessing or a burden? Jung believed the answer depends on how you integrate that awareness. Comment 1. If you believe truth, no matter how uncomfortable, is worth the cost. Comment 2 if you feel it's sometimes wiser to protect yourself by looking away. He referred to this as the problem of the superior function, a condition in which a person's greatest gift turns into their greatest liability, as it distances them from participation in the collective unconscious. However, Jung concluded that the true danger did not lie in the perception alone. Those with highly differentiated perception can discern the unconscious contents of others with clarity, which makes them vulnerable to shadow projection, a phenomenon Jung documented extensively, where individuals unconsciously lash out at those who reflect aspects of themselves they refuse to confront. In Psychology of the Unconscious, Jung wrote, "Nothing has a stronger influence psychologically on their environment, and especially on their children, than the unlived life of the parent." He later found that this principle applied broadly to all types of relationships. When an individual's shadow is reflected through another's sharp perception, the unconscious mind faces only two possible responses: to integrate the shadow or to attack the mirror. Jung repeatedly observed this dynamic in his clinical practice, noting that the one who perceives with clarity is often accused of causing the very problems they merely identify. Jung's patients with differentiated intuition encountered this reaction frequently. If they carefully suggested that someone might be struggling, they were met with hostility and accused of negativity or stirring up drama. When they voiced concern about evident problems, they were often charged with being judgmental or inventing issues where none existed. Jung recognized this pattern was no coincidence, but rather a form of psychological defense. In Memories, Dreams, Reflections, he wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But for most people, it's easier to attack the person reflecting their shadow than to examine what's being reflected." This dynamic gives rise to what Jung called the scapegoat phenomenon. Highly perceptive individuals often end up being labeled as the source of trouble in every group they join, not because they generate problems, but because they expose issues already embedded in the collective unconscious. Jung observed, "The bearer of superior perception becomes the repository for all that the group cannot consciously acknowledge about itself." This explains why such individuals not only feel misunderstood, but also perceive themselves as being systematically targeted by an intangible and irrational force. However, Jung's most unsettling finding was yet to emerge. He noticed that intense perceptual ability did not manifest uniformly among individuals. As a result, he identified four distinct subtypes within the introverted intuitive category, each reflecting a unique method of processing unconscious material from others. Type 1. The feeling intuitive, Jung. Jung described patients who combined introverted intuition with a well-developed feeling function. Such individuals not only perceive psychological states, but physically feel them within their own bodies. They absorb others' emotions so thoroughly that they often cannot tell where their own feelings end and the absorbed emotions begin. Jung wrote the feeling intuitive lives in a state of perpetual emotional contagion, experiencing the unlived emotions of everyone in their environment. Type 2. The thinking intuitive. These individuals identify psychological patterns and predict future behavior with remarkable precision. Jung noted they could foresee relationship breakdowns, career collapses, and personal crises months in advance, not by conscious reasoning, but through unconscious pattern recognition. He wrote, they possess an uncanny ability to perceive the logical conclusions of unconscious processes that others cannot yet see. Type 3. The sensation intuitive. Jung described individuals who detect the physical signs of psychological states in others, spotting illness before symptoms emerge, recognizing fatigue before it is expressed, or sensing bodily tension that betrays emotional distress. He wrote, these individuals serve as early warning systems for psychological and physical disease in their environment. Type 4. The pure intuitive. This rarest category combined introverted intuition with what Jung termed an undifferentiated auxiliary function. They perceived everything around them, but struggled to organize or articulate their insights in a coherent manner. Jung remarked, they exist in a constant state of overwhelm, absorbing vast amounts of unconscious material without possessing the necessary psychological framework to process it effectively. Recognizing your unique pattern is essential, as each type demands distinct strategies for addressing what Jung termed the integration challenge. Before exploring solutions, it is important to grasp why Jung found this discovery so perilous. He had witnessed the harmful consequences of undifferentiated perception in his patients, leading him to conclude that perceiving everything without adequate psychological integration could seriously endanger both personal and societal health. Jung outlined three particular risks that made this realization especially alarming. First, there is the danger of disrupting the collective unconscious. He stated, the individual who perceives with too much clarity endangers the shared agreements upon which societal harmony relies. When someone penetrates the illusions binding groups together, those silent pacts to overlook certain realities, they become a destabilizing influence. Jung noted that institutions, families, and societies rely partly on these unconscious agreements about what will or will not be recognized. Those with heightened perception unintentionally breach these agreements merely by living authentically. Second, there is the danger of psychological isolation. Jung described how differentiated perception leads to what he called the problem of superior function, wherein one's strongest psychological asset also becomes their deepest source of suffering. He wrote, the curse of consciousness is that it cannot be shared with those who do not have it. The person becomes an island of awareness in a sea of unconsciousness. This solitude extends beyond the social realm into the existential, with many such individuals feeling as though they inhabit an entirely different reality than those around them. Third, and most perilously, Jung discovered the risk of identity dissolution. Individuals who take in unconscious material from others may lose connection with their own genuine self, becoming so overwhelmed by external psychological influences that they cannot separate their own inner reality from what they absorb from their surroundings. Jung termed this state participation mystique, in which personal boundaries vanish and one merges with the collective unconscious. He warned the danger is not simply a social isolation, but psychological annihilation, the total loss of one's individuality to collective possession. For these reasons, Jung saw integrating superior perception as not only a therapeutic necessity, but a psychological imperative, given the serious hazards of leaving it unintegrated. In response, he formulated what he called the individuation process, a structured method for preserving one's identity while establishing a conscious relationship with unconscious material. Phase 1. Recognition and differentiation. Jung instructed his highly perceptive patients to first identify when they were taking in psychological content that did not originate within themselves. He referred to this as conscious discrimination, the skill of distinguishing between genuine internal experiences and unconsciously absorbed external material. He emphasized the first task is to establish what belongs to you and what belongs to others. Without this discrimination, there can be no individual development. As a practical method, Jung advised spending daily periods in complete solitude to allow external influences to settle, enabling recognition of one's own authentic inner voice. Phase 2. Shadow integration. Jung found that those who perceive the shadow in others with great clarity often do so because they have yet to face their own. The more one rejects their own potential for deceit, selfishness, or cruelty, the more they are unsettled when encountering these traits in others. He wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves, but only if we have the courage to look inward rather than remaining focused outward." Integrating the shadow involves recognizing that every human trait observed in others also exists within oneself. This acknowledgement does not make a person bad. It makes them whole, capable of clear perception without judgment. Phase 3. Conscious participation. This concluding phase entails what Jung described as conscious participation in the collective unconscious meaning. The capacity to interact with the unconscious material of others without becoming engulfed by it or losing one's own identity. He explained, "The individuated person can serve as a bridge between conscious and unconscious, helping to make the unconscious conscious in others without sacrificing their own psychological integrity. Achieving this requires cultivating what Jung termed psychological containers, the ability to temporarily hold another's unconscious content while remaining aware that it does not belong to oneself." Jung recognized that superior perception could either lead to personal transformation or to an individual's destruction. For this reason, he examined historical figures to identify the factors that distinguish successful integration from psychological collapse. Case study: Nietzsche, an unintegrated perception. Jung was profoundly influenced by Nietzsche's philosophy, but observed in Memories, Dreams, Reflections that Nietzsche's exceptional perceptiveness ultimately resulted in psychological collapse. Jung described Nietzsche's penetrating ability to see through the illusions of social, religious, and philosophical systems with striking clarity. However, Nietzsche never learned to integrate these perceptions in a constructive way. Instead of applying his vision toward healing, he used it as a weapon against society. Jung wrote, Nietzsche possessed extraordinary insight into human nature, but he remained identified with his superior function, rather than integrating it into a balanced personality. According to Jung, Nietzsche's isolation and eventual breakdown illustrated the fate of unintegrated superior perception, where the individual is devoured by what they perceive rather than transformed through it. Case study: Meister Eckhart and successful integration. Jung closely examined the medieval mystic Meister Eckhart, whom he regarded as a model of successfully integrated superior perception. Eckhart had what Jung described as mystical intuition, the capacity to perceive spiritual and psychological truths beyond the reach of most people. Unlike Nietzsche, Eckhart directed his insights toward compassionate service. Jung wrote, Eckhart transformed his superior perception into wisdom that could nourish others without overwhelming them. He saw clearly but spoke in ways that invited understanding rather than resistance. Jung attributed Eckhart's success to what he called conscious humility, the understanding that superior perception is a gift meant to be shared with care, not wielded as a weapon. Jung's personal journey of integration. Perhaps most importantly, Jung chronicled his own battle with overwhelming perception during what he termed his confrontation with the unconscious 1913-1919, as recorded in the Red Book. He admitted, I was menaced by a psychosis and was saved only by my ability to understand what was happening to me through my work with patients. His intense perception of both his own and others' unconscious material almost led to his undoing until he found a way to consciously integrate these experiences. Jung's turning point came when he understood that his overpowering perceptions were not signs of illness, but indicators of an evolutionary process consciousness striving to surpass the limits of the collective mindset. This insight reshaped his therapeutic approach to patients with similar abilities, recognizing that those with heightened perception frequently endure isolation. Jung stressed the vital necessity of finding what he termed the few who understand people able to engage with differentiated consciousness without reacting defensively. In The Development of Personality, Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." However, he noted that this privilege cannot be attained in solitude. It demands recognition from others who can perceive authenticity. Jung identified three key types of relationships essential for highly perceptive individuals. Type 1: fellow individuated persons. He explained the individuated person recognizes another individuated person immediately. There is a quality of presence and authenticity that cannot be fabricated. These connections often happen instantly and intensely. You recognize each other as members of what Jung called the conscious minority. Such connections are uncommon, yet vital for psychological well-being. In the presence of other individuated individuals, you can express your true self without worrying about intimidating or overpowering them. Type 2 refers to individuals involved in the process of individuation. Jung noted that those pursuing personal growth through therapy, self-reflection, or spiritual practices often respond to superior perception without defensiveness. Even if they do not have it themselves, they appreciate its importance. Jung stated, "Those who have begun to know themselves can bear to be known by others." Type 3 describes natural containers people who, despite lacking superior perception, can hold and process psychological material without becoming distressed. Such individuals are often mature and have endured significant life hardships. The recognition process involves signs that indicate a relationship is psychologically safe. These individuals respond with sincere curiosity to your observations instead of reacting defensively. They can admit to contradictions and limitations without shame, show psychological mindedness and interest in inner realities, remain emotionally composed when faced with hard truths, and exhibit authentic curiosity about awareness and personal growth. The gradual revelation protocol is Jung's method for disclosing perceptive abilities in a measured way. Start with mild, gentle insights. 2. Observe how the other person responds. 3. Determine if their reaction is defensive or inquisitive. 4. Deepen the conversation only as their capacity allows. And 5. Present insights as contributions rather than declarations. Jung stressed, the goal is not to find people who accept everything you see, but to find people who can engage with your perceptions as valuable contributions to understanding rather than threats to their self-image. In your life, have you found the few who understand, those rare people who can meet your depth without fear? Comment 1. If you found such people and treasure them deeply. Comment 2. If you're still searching for those who can truly meet you at your level of awareness. Integrated superior perception benefits both the individual and society. Consequently, Jung regarded successful individuation as crucial not only for individual health, but also for advancing human consciousness. In The Undiscovered Self, he wrote, "The individual has always been the carrier of the living spirit, the one who brings about the change in society." Jung believed that those who integrate superior perception effectively become culture carriers, individuals who contribute to the evolution of collective awareness. The 4 stages of transformation begin with Stage 1, recognition without overwhelm. This stage involves accepting your perceptive abilities without feeling overpowered by them. Jung referred to this as the conscious acceptance of the superior function and stated, "The beginning of wisdom is the recognition of what one actually is not, what one wishes to be or fears to be." Stage 2, integration without isolation, focuses on applying perception in beneficial ways while preserving strong social ties. Jung named this social individuation, in which one remains authentic without withdrawing from the world, instead engaging with it more mindfully. Stage 3, service without sacrifice, occurs when perception is shared as a gift rather than endured as a burden. Jung called this conscious participation, meaning the use of one's abilities to aid others without self-exhaustion. He expressed it as, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, and then to offer that authentic self in service of the whole. Stage 4, legacy without attachment, is what Jung termed the transcendent function. It means applying one's perception to aid the evolution of collective consciousness while remaining unattached to recognition or approval. Jung noted, the individuated person works for the future, not for personal recognition in the present. The integration becomes cultural medicine. Jung believed that those who integrate superior perception play an essential role in human evolution. They perceive realities that collective awareness has not yet recognized, helping prepare society for its growth. He stated, "What is not brought to consciousness comes to us as fate." Individuals with strong perceptive abilities who achieve integration can bring hidden psychological material to awareness before it emerges in destructive collective actions. However, Jung cautioned that integrating superior perception carries certain risks, and he documented the most frequent ways people undermine their own transformation. The first pitfall is the inflation trap. Jung explored psychological inflation in depth, describing it as a state where individuals identify with their superior function instead of integrating it consciously. In two essays on analytical psychology, he warned the danger is that the ego identifies with the archetype, leading to an inflation that cuts the individual off from human relationships. Jung noted that many highly perceptive people succumb to the prophet complex, feeling compelled to rescue everyone from unconsciousness. This mindset results in preaching judgment and ultimately social isolation. Jung remarked, "The moment one believes oneself to be the bearer of absolute truth, one has fallen into the trap of unconscious possession by the very forces one seeks to understand." The second pitfall is withdrawal justification. Jung described instances where people used their heightened perception to rationalize total disengagement from society, convincing themselves that others were too unaware to warrant interaction, a stance he saw as spiritual arrogance disguised as insight. Jung wrote, "True individuation requires engagement with the unconscious world, not escape from it. The hermit who withdraws from life has not transcended it, but has been defeated by it." Pitfall 3 is what could be called the helper's haze. Jung noticed that certain perceptive individuals become dependent on being indispensable, defining their identity solely by their capacity to help others, which causes them to neglect their own growth. Jung cautioned, when perception becomes identity, the person disappears behind the function. This is not individuation, but its opposite, the sacrifice of personality to role. The fourth pitfall is the overwhelm return, in which even well-integrated individuals relapse during times of stress trauma or major change, losing their psychological boundaries and becoming overwhelmed by others' unconscious material. Jung stressed, integration is not a permanent achievement, but a dynamic process requiring constant conscious attention. Integration, maintenance, involves Jung's recommended practices for sustaining healthy balance, taking regular solitude to separate your own psychological material from what you have absorbed, making deliberate choices about when and with whom to use your perceptive abilities, engaging in ongoing shadow work to avoid projecting your unconscious material, staying connected to people who can provide reality checks and support, and using creative outlets to process intense perceptual input. Jung stated, "The integrated person does not achieve perfection, but learns to dance consciously with their own psychological complexity." Jung viewed superior perception through the lens of collective psychological growth, concluding that highly perceptive individuals fulfill a crucial evolutionary role in the advancement of human consciousness. In The Undiscovered Self, Jung wrote, "The individual has always been the carrier of the living spirit, the one who brings about the change in society." Jung believed that those with heightened perception act as consciousness pioneers whose psychological maturity arrives ahead of the collective's readiness. The historical pattern, according to Jung, shows that people with superior perception have often emerged before society could accept their insights, functioning as scouts for unexplored psychological realms humanity would later need to navigate. Jung stated, "What appears in the individual first as psychological insight later manifests in the collective as cultural transformation. The individual serves as a laboratory for consciousness experiments that will eventually benefit the whole." In modern contexts, Jung suggested that highly perceptive individuals may detect psychological trends explaining collective behavior, foresee environmental and social instability before it becomes evident, recognize spiritual opportunities beyond existing religious systems, anticipate unconsidered technological effects, and identify elements of the collective shadow that require conscious integration. Jung observed that sensitive individuals experience collective issues earlier and more intensely than others, and their personal struggles often mirror the problems society as a whole must confront. Jung's key insight was that superior perception contributes most to evolution when consciously integrated rather than passively endured. The aim is not to become a martyr for awareness, but to serve as a bridge between current reality and emerging possibilities. Jung wrote, "The individuated person serves the collective, not by sacrificing their individuality, but by developing it so completely that it becomes a gift to the whole." In ultimate integration, Jung noted, individuals with superior perception hold their abilities lightly, seeing clearly without attachment to others, accepting what they see, perceiving deeply without compulsion to fix everything they observe. Jung referred to this as the transcendent function, the capacity to contribute to the evolution of consciousness effortlessly, without coercion or moralizing, by simply living in a more conscious way. Recall Jung's 1913 patient, an introverted intuitive, who sought his help during his personal psychological crisis. After 3 years of applying Jung's individuation process, her life underwent a complete transformation. She gained the ability to separate her own psychological material from that which she absorbed from others, secured work as a counselor, where her refined perception benefited those in distress, and formed relationships with individuals who appreciated rather than feared her insights. Most significantly, she no longer saw her heightened perception as a curse, but as a gift, in Jung's words, that required deliberate cultivation. Jung described her change. She did not reduce her vision, but learned to see with greater wisdom, did not lessen her depth of perception, but approached it with greater conscious engagement. Her gift stayed the same, but her relationship with it became integrated instead of overpowering. This case illustrates Jung's most dangerous discovery, that certain individuals are born with a consciousness ahead of collective readiness. Such heightened perception can either lead to their destruction through isolation and overload, or transform them into precisely what humanity requires for its psychological progress. Superior perception is not a flaw in your psychology, but an advanced aspect of consciousness evolution. You are not damaged for noticing what others overlook. You are simply ahead of your time psychologically. The issue is not whether to hide your perception, to blend with collective unconsciousness, but whether you will cultivate the individuation skills needed to integrate it with awareness. Jung's individuation method provides a path from perilous isolation to conscious service, from overpowering perception to integrated wisdom, and from psychological burden to evolutionary gift. You were given the ability to perceive fully, not to endure in quiet misery, but to aid the advancement of consciousness. The world requires your insights, but offered with integration, wisdom, and strategic awareness, turning potentially dangerous perception into cultural healing. Your gift itself is not the burden. Rather, your unconscious approach to it is. By integrating it consciously, you embody what Jung believed highly perceptive people are meant to be: pioneers of consciousness, preparing humanity for inevitable but still unseen psychological growth. Jung's most perilous finding was not simply that some perceive everything, but that most who do never learn to apply this vision with wisdom. The real danger lies not in the perception itself, but in neglecting to build a conscious relationship with such extraordinary capabilities. You are not excessive for this world. You are precisely what the evolution of consciousness needs, provided you learn to use your perception as consciously as Jung used his. The true risk of perceiving everything is not overseeing, but failing to see with the integration and wisdom your abilities require. Which path are you on with your perception? Are you still wrestling with its weight, or have you begun turning it into a force for good? Comment 1 if you feel you're still learning how to carry your gift without being consumed by it. Comment 2 if you've begun using it with intention, integration, and purpose. If Jung's depiction of the highly perceptive individual resonates with you, then you belong to a rare psychological type he deemed vital for the advancement of consciousness. Share in the comments which category of differentiated perceiver you belong to. Your individuation journey aligns with others on a similar path. Subscribe for further insights into Jung's findings on psychological growth that surpasses collective unconscious constraints. For more of Jung's perspectives on psychological types that fall outside conventional norms, watch my video on Wealth Psy, which explores harmful environments for highly sensitive and perceptive people, and Jung's methods for safeguarding awareness while interacting with an unconscious society. Thank you for watching. See you in the next dimension.